About 3 years ago, only a couple of months after we got together, me and my boyfriend were planning to move out together and had been viewing one bedroom flats. We had some pretty bad luck and only managed to find one that had any potential, but it was in a converted house and not in a block. The upstairs had been separated from the downstairs, with the hallway being made into a small porch and one set of steps leading upstairs and the other to the ground floor, which is where the landlord lived. We had accepted the flat before meeting the landlord, and it's something that I deeply regret to this day. When we did meet him, he was always away while we were viewing the flat. I can only say that the first impressions of a person matter a lot. This whole gut feeling thing is real and I should have followed it. He spoke very common, and if you're not from England, that basically means you don't really speak with a posh accent, so you say a lot of "you're right mate" and stuff like that, which annoyed me from the beginning. He looked strange, with horribly intense creepy blue eyes. I can't even remember vividly what he looked like, but something about him just made me not want to look at him in the eye. Well, the first meetings and impressions aside, he seemed kind of rough but was polite and explained the rules of the flat. Now before I go on, I want to say how shady this flat was now that I have lived in other flats. The electric meter was run by pound coins and seemed to be considerably more expensive than it seemed. The landlord kept telling us that he would come up by month and month to collect the money we put in. Keep in mind that we are only paying for the electricity to run the upstairs of a small house, and it was already costing us about 20 quid a week. I can't remember how we paid for gas, but we didn't have a meter. The landlord also told us he would be unable to have the internet working while we lived there, as it would involve us making holes in the walls, and the council tax was apparently included in the rent, meaning we gave the landlord our council tax with our rent and he would pay it off. So things already seemed off. Now, it also didn't help that the estate agent conveniently forgot to mention that his wife had died, and that was why he had to convert the upstairs. The landlord told us this with no discomfort whatsoever, and I couldn't stop thinking about whether or not I was sleeping in the same room that she actually passed away in. The first time the landlord confirmed my suspicions of being a bit strange was when we just moved in. He told us he had left a sofa in the living room so we could do what we wanted with it, throw it, keep it or sell it. So my parents, needing a temporary sofa, offered to take it off our hands. When my dad and boyfriend were helping put it in the back of his car, the landlord had been gardening, and he started freaking out, saying that it was an anniversary present. A sofa? Okay. And then, rather than telling my dad and boyfriend to leave it in the garden for him to find somewhere to put it, he ordered them to carry it round to his garden. Horribly embarrassed, my dad and boyfriend did as he asked. Now, it seemed like a silly reason to start hating someone, but just the way he flipped, his behaviour, how rude he was about it, the fact that he actually said to us that we could do exactly what we wanted with it, and as soon as we tried to get rid of it, now it is an anniversary present, and how dare we not ask him first? It didn't make sense. A couple of weeks later, we started noticing that he was smoking pot, a lot of it. The porch constantly smelled of weed, which was embarrassing for us when guests came over. You know, I didn't think anything of it, but it certainly didn't help my attitude towards him when our entire flat smelled like weed the whole time. Another reason he made me uncomfortable, I used to work at a bar for a few months while I lived there, and whenever my dad dropped me off home at 3 a.m. when most of my shifts were done, he would look out of his living room window, creepily, seeing his shadow and silhouette move and just standing there while I walked in the door was more than enough to send chills up my spine and make me hesitant to come in. He also never approached me. I had talked to my fiancé instead, early in the morning. When my fiancé came back from work, the landlord had opened the door to tell him that I was being too noisy coming in at night and that he needed to tell me to be more quiet. This coming from the guy who was doing God knows what downstairs at ridiculous times in the morning. And I know it was a silly thing for the landlord to shout at my parents for, because I tried to be as quiet as I possibly could every night so I didn't wake him up, and open the door, so he was just scaring the hell out of me. Flash forward a couple of months, and I realise I'm pregnant. Me and my fiance are super happy. We have some friends around one night, and the next day, we go out to tell my parents about this. Now, before I go on, I would say that me and my fiance smoked inside on the odd occasion because we couldn't be bothered to go out. I used to smoke outside the bathroom window when my parents was at work during the night shifts, so I didn't have to go out alone and risk encountering him again. One afternoon, my fiance and I were cuddling and watching a film together when we hear a knock at the door. It was the landlord, asking to empty the electric meter. Strange, considering he'd only emptied it a week ago, but I couldn't tell my partner since I hid whatever the landlord came in for because of how uncomfortable he made me feel. I'm sitting in the living room with the door closed. It was a bit of a mess, and I then heard the landlord and my fiance making small talk, but the landlord doesn't put his ladder up to get to the electric meter. Instead, I hear him starting to walk around the flat. His voice is very irritated and angry, and my fiance trying to stay polite and formal. I get up and stand near the door and hear better. Apparently, my fiance tells me later that the landlord had decided to go for a sudden inspection of the flat. He'd walked directly into the bathroom and pointed at a cigarette ash on the windowsill. Not even hesitating or looking anywhere else, he then walks directly into the kitchen and points up the washing up that we had. Then, going on about how that he's not judgmental about the way we'd live, but he'd been there for days according to him. Before he got the chance to go on any further, I opened the living room door with our contract in hand and shouted at him, reading the part that said he wasn't allowed to enter or inspect the flat without 2 weeks' notice at least. He then said with the biggest grin on his face that technically my boyfriend had let him in so it didn't count. We argued for a bit until he blurred out, "When was you gonna tell me you were pregnant?" Now, I will always remember the deadly silence that followed after that, only broken by me. I asked him how he knew I was. He told me he heard us talking about it. I told him that we hadn't spoke about it anywhere that he might have heard us in case he decided to evict us, knowing we'd be moving out to find a 2-bedroom because of it eventually. He then told us he knew because of my Facebook. My privacy settings on Facebook were set to absolute max. My fiance didn't allow anyone who wasn't a friend to see his account either. I told the landlord this, who then changed his story again and said that a friend told him. This 40-year-old man, whom had no visitors in for 6 months, who had been living there, had a friend? After that, we got him to leave and sat down together, freaked out. Even more so by the fact that we realised that he hadn't even emptied the electric meter before he left, so that he had never been there for that reason, though he said so in the first place. I didn't say anything, even though I knew after that the landlord had been coming in when we weren't there. My partner admitted a few minutes later that the landlord must have been coming in when he wasn't there. He knew where the ashtray was on the windowsill straight away. The bathroom window was never open much when I did smoke since it was restricted by a child lock. Another thing is that I also never smoked it during the day, only at stupid times in the morning and barely smoking at all. How had he known where the washing up had been, and how would he have known it had been there for days? More importantly, how did he know I was pregnant? We figured out a way he might have known. At your first midwife appointment, you're given books and letters put inside a folder to bring to other appointments. This sat on my desk in the living room, though the only thing that wouldn't have made sense is that he hadn't entered that room during his inspection. Maybe he'd gone through it. We searched for cameras in the smoke alarm and other various places in the flat, but the landlord had done the construction work himself, so we had no way of knowing about any recording hardware without breaking the place apart. We wasn't able to move out or do anything we wanted until our contract allowed us to. I'd lived there for a few months in the early stages of pregnancy, above a man who was either entering our flat when we were not there or recording us at the very least. We had enough evidence in our minds, but nothing solid enough to go to the police. I kept a key in the door every night so he wouldn't be able to use it just in case. Closer to the termination date of our contract, we wrote official letters to the estate agency explaining our circumstance, and wrote one official letter to the landlord, posted it through his letterbox. Now the funny thing, he hadn't even confronted us about it. He didn't tell us that we were making stories up or lying, he just ignored it and didn't even answer to us. We had eventually managed to get out of the flat and move into a different place, which was also just as bad and had its own problems, to be honest. But you just want to know what's the most messed up part? We had all these meetings with the estate agents, told them everything that happened, talked about how dodgy everything was, even with the flat's electric meters and not being allowed any internet. And the estate agent then told us that he talked to our landlord about the allegations and they'd sort it. Once we got into our new flat, out of curiosity we looked online. The flat was listed under the same estate agents again. Knowing that this guy could have potentially been filming/monitoring his tenants, the estate agents still realised that this was wrong, but even then relisted the property. It scares me to this day knowing that innocent couples like us or people could be moving in there, not knowing what the person below them is capable of doing. So, this started happening to me when I was 14 or 15. We always ordered from the same Chinese food place. My girlfriend and I maybe do this once or twice a week because we love Chinese food. We always had the same delivery guy. Being young naive girls, we were overly friendly, appreciative for the delivery man who brought our favourite food. One day, it was just me and one of my girl's friends and we ordered. My dad wasn't home because he always worked late, but I was old enough to be home alone so it wasn't an issue. My doorbell rang and I went to answer with exact cash, including tip, and say thank you, and that's what happened and we're all set. So I thought. He said, "Let me come in and just count it quick." I said, "Oh, it's $25, whatever the tip is over, you're set." And he kinda walked towards the door, getting closer as if he was just gonna walk in. Luckily, my dad walked in through the back door right at that second and asked whether the car was the delivery guy's, and the man just left at the second he saw my dad. We didn't say anything because we were scared my dad would go mad at us. So fast forward maybe a year later, so things happened to my friend, but at her house. She called her mum crying and her mum called the Chinese place. The guy got fired because they had gotten other complaints, so we thought we were in the clear. Fast forward maybe 5 years further down the road. I go to this 24-hour gym. Half of the time it's unstaffed, but you need a key to get in, which is a swipe key. I was home alone and it was maybe 8:30 at night and look who walks in. Him. He tried talking to me and I left very quickly. I told my friends I saw him. Whatever, it was just a weird convenience. Now, I'm 20 years old at this point. I work full time with my dad. And we were driving around and had to stop for gas. We own a company together and our company truck is very vivid and has our last name on it because it's a part of the company name. I go inside to grab a bottle of water and get some other things while my dad is pumping the gas. And the same guy's in the gas station. And he says to me, "You look like someone I know." And this was when I was 15 that I first encountered him. I said no, paid, walked out and said to my dad, "Let's go." Then the guy comes up to us. Well, he kind of creeps up to my dad's side and said, "Do you know someone by the name of," and said my exact name that lives on, and he said my exact street. He even knew my last name first and remembered my address from probably 7 years ago. My dad remembered him immediately and told him to leave me alone or he was going to call the cops. We didn't know his name or who he was, so it was just a threat to hopefully get him to stop being creepy to me. I never would have told this to anybody, but how would he have got my last name? I can only guess he knew it from me paying for a credit card or stalking, who knows. Then 2 years later, I am 24 now, almost 25. I went to the grocery store early, at like 7 a.m. early. I couldn't sleep and just wanted to get some errands out of the way on a Saturday. I grabbed my stuff and went to the checkout on one of the 3 to 4 lanes that were open. The store was dead. I was like, sweet, I'll be in and out. And guess who walks up to pay right behind me at the register with all the others open? The same delivery man. That was my last encounter to date. I'll keep you updated, but I'm starting to get more and more worried. It's one thing having a stalker for a few months, but a few years? I don't know what to think anymore. So my mum and brothers were going to visit some family in California for a few days during the summer. So they packed up and left very early in the morning at around 5 a.m. My dad and I stayed behind since I had a job now and couldn't take time off, nor could my dad. At the time we lived in a small 3-bedroom apartment. A few hours after my mum and brothers left, my dad had gone for work and I got up for bed and started choosing my work outfit and hopped in the shower. After I was finished rinsing off, I hear my small chihuahua barking her head off like I've never heard her do it before. She's actually a pretty calm and lazy chihuahua, so my paranoia started off straight away after I heard this, so I shut off the water and I heard some sort of scratching and my dog still barking like crazy and growling. I decided to jump out of the shower and grab my towel to dry off, but of course I didn't remember to bring my clothes into the bathroom with me. All of a sudden I hear the sliding door swing open and my dog is now going even crazier than before. I now know that somebody had been trying to break in and had been successful. They're now inside my apartment. The door to my bedroom is directly across from the bathroom, so I'm helpless and clothesless in the bathroom with my phone in my room. So as I listen in to someone walking around in the living room, I open the bathroom door and run across to my bedroom while I open the door. I then hear somebody running and my dog is now beside my feet. I try and grab her to come in the room with me, but she runs away, probably to bark at the intruder. I yell to get out of the house and that the cops are on their way. They just laugh. I'm now in my bedroom locked in. My window has always been jammed, so I can't escape. I quickly call 911 and change while I'm explaining that I'm locked in my bedroom and somebody is in my apartment, as I text my dad while on the line. I'm still worried about my dog and it's been quite a while now, so I look under my door and see no one there. I cracked the door open a bit, hoping that they got scared off and ran. Nope. My bedroom door can somewhat see into an area of the living room. The guy's just sitting on our couch, staring straight back at me. He's in a hoodie and the strings are pulled tight across so I can't see their face. They get up and my dog goes nuts and tries to bite him. When I see him get up, I get scared and close my door again. I hear as if he kicks her and she starts crying and runs over to the bathroom door, then to the bedroom. I can see her little paws under my door, but I'm too scared to open it with the possibility that he's right there. I'm now crying and scared about my dog, but I know I can't open the door. The operator is still on the phone with me at this point and tells me that the cop is now there and coming up to my apartment. The dude comes up to my door and knocks on it softly. Then a few seconds later, I hear my front door open and shut. A minute later, loud knocks at the front door and the operator tells me to go open the door. I try to refuse because I fear that they're still out there hiding, but the operator insists that they're probably gone by now. I run out to the front door and let the cop in. I explain what just happened and he looks at me like he's bored. He tells me they'll look around the complex and to knock on my neighbour's door and see if they've heard anything, and that I must lock my doors. I didn't even bother to search my apartment to make sure he's still in there. The cop leaves. I try to brave myself and look through the apartment. When I get to my brother's room, I see that the window is wide open and the curtains are moving. They had still been in there the whole time. This means they were trying to lure me out, and they opened and closed my front door, but the cop got there shortly after and I'm sure that's why they escaped. I tell my dad everything and he gets there shortly, and after he's mad that the law enforcement didn't do anything. By the way, the cop never come back. My dad installed a bunch of locks everywhere, and while he's there, I get ready for work. As I walk out of my front door to go to my car, my neighbour upstairs is standing at the top of the stairs and stares at me, and I realise then that it was him. He stares at me the whole time I'm walking and even smiles. He even had the same hoodie on. I had texted my dad to let him know it was him. Don't know what happened, but my dad is a scary guy. My dog was fine after it, and about a week later they moved out, and I never heard from them again. I started leasing a condo in 2010 and lived there for roughly 4 years. To understand this story, I have to explain that the location/layout of the condo is as follows. First and foremost, in the area I was in, my condo was considered a carriage house/back house. Basically what it means is that my unit was detached from all the others with a small condominium complex. My unit also sat above the other complexes, water heater and very small laundry facility, therefore I was on the second floor. In short, my condo was basically comparable to living in a very small house that is on a second floor, so I had no one above me, besides me or below me. It was a freestanding unit, and if I wanted to visit my neighbours I had to walk down the stairs and go through a gate. My condo was also only accessible through that alley. So now I've got that out of the way, onto the story. I'd been living in this condo for about 2 years when this occurred and never experienced anything remotely similar prior to or after this event. One night I go outside to my little landing to smoke a cigarette. I know it's bad for me, but anyway. It's a night time, therefore it's dark outside, but our alley is pretty lit up so I can see everything pretty well. I was just on my phone leaning over the railing looking down into the alley. I saw a youngish guy walking down the alley near my unit, no big deal. Occasionally we would get people that walked into our alley from the bus stop, but they never just stopped there and stared. They continued on and I never felt threatened or concerned as I lived in a pretty prestigious area. However, this guy stops abruptly and just stares at me. I mean, the dude literally stopped dead in his tracks. He don't say a word, he just stares straight up at me. At this point, we're making eye contact. I can't explain why or how I felt the way I did when we made eye contact to this day, but I never felt the same emotions that come over me that time, and I could just sense evil no less than 10 feet away. His eyes had zero emotions. It looked as if he was staring at me like a lion before it killed its prey. I had never seen this man before in any of my life. And again, he was just staring at me. After making the eye contact, my heart was beating rapidly, so I put out my cigarette and went inside. I didn't want to make it seem extremely obvious because, well, I didn't know what his intentions were. I locked my screen door, locked my big wooden door, and called one of my neighbours to see if he could go over and check out what this guy was doing. The neighbour answers, but says, "I'm home right now, but I'll be pulling down the alley in a couple of minutes so I can check for you." At this point, I'm standing in my kitchen, which is about 20 feet from the door. I started to hear footsteps then on my stairs. That was then followed by the sound of somebody trying to open my door. I then heard the screen door being almost pried open. I wasn't expecting anyone that evening. I soon found out that when stuff goes down and fight or flight kicks in, I freeze apparently. No grabbing a knife for me. So it's needless to say that if anything happens in the future, I don't know what's going to happen to me. At this point, I don't know how long it's been from a time standpoint, but honestly, time does stand still when you're in true fear. And I know this man has gotten my screen door open, and who knows what's next. As I'm just standing there preparing for the worst, I then hear my neighbour screaming, "What are you doing?" The man called into my saviour neighbour, flew down the stairs, booked it through the alley, as my neighbour tried to catch up, but my neighbour was a bit older. I don't know what he was going to do or what could have happened that evening had my neighbour not come to me, but I am honestly so very lucky that he was already on his way back home. God knows what would have actually gone down had things have been different that night. What I'm all about to tell you happened a while back when I was around 13 or 14. I just made myself a Facebook account and I had a huge crush on this guy who used to be my neighbour, and he had just moved out of my street. I was super sad that I wouldn't see him again until a beautiful surprise one night. I opened in my Facebook account with a friend's request from him. My heart was racing, I was ecstatic. We started talking a bit, but nothing really interesting or attention seeking for me to develop. But one night we started a convo as we usually would. Then it got really scary. All of a sudden he started claiming he wasn't my crush, that he had hacked this account and knows a lot about me, my entire name, which wasn't written on my Facebook profile. I'd put a weird half-cut version of it. It wasn't easy to guess what the real one would be. I spoke to my crush about how we used to be neighbours and how he moved out of my old street and said the name. Now, this creep began threatening me on how he would come get me at my house because I was young and beautiful and his wife is getting old. As a 13 or 14-year-old, I was completely freaked out and shaking on my desk chair, staring at this conversation. Now, at one point, I thought maybe my crush was just messing with me, as he did have this low-key weird personality. I asked him and he sent me a picture of himself that was clearly taken within seconds, as it was a blurry, nasty picture. On the picture was an ugly old wrinkly 40 or 50-year-old skinny man looking like he'd been taking crack. I was out of my mind, panicking. My mother had warned me previously on how I shouldn't be making a social media account at this age, but I was so stubborn I didn't listen. Now I was scared. I didn't want to tell my mother because she would be dead mad at me. It was around 1 AM at night, so I didn't know what to do. I ended up just blocking the account and going to bed, trying to move on, telling myself that he was probably just trying to scare me off. I was wrong. About an hour later I received a phone call on my cell phone from an unknown number. I picked it up. It was that man. "I had told you I knew about you. Let's talk." I hung up at this point. I was so done with it. I went into a full panic attack. I woke up my mother and told her everything. She asked me to print out the conversations and I did. She then told me that she would take care of this when the morning comes. So, the next day I went to school and my mum was working from home that day. When I come back that evening, my mum told me that the creep rang our door around lunchtime, insisting a couple of times on the bell and knocking on the glass window door. My mother called the police immediately. She took the plate number of his van as he left it turned on the right in front of my house, while he was trying so hard to get an answer from all of his knocking and ringing. It had turned out that he was a wanted sex offender. This happened to me about a month ago after I started my freshman year of college. I had to take a trip to Goodwill to buy some cheap clothes, and it was getting fairly late into the evening. I knew I had to hurry up because I didn't want to miss the last back bus to campus, so I was rushing through my shopping a little faster than I should have. I was rounding a corner with both arms full of clothes when I nearly ran headfirst into some guy. I was flustered and apologized to him, expecting to hear one back. I mean, we ran into each other. I would kind of expect an apology from the guy too. When I look up at him, he's 6'1", has a well-trimmed beard, had the whole man bun thing going on, but the thing that got my attention was his eyes. They were bright blue and very wide. I don't think I saw him blink once. He was fairly attractive, but those eyes were unnerving. He didn't say anything, he just kinda stared at me. I proceeded to continue my calls to the changing room without waiting for him to apologise. I pretty much immediately forgot the events that had just transpired, and I tried on the clothes a little. I found an outfit I liked, put the clothes that I didn't like away, and gone off to look at some shoes. I'm just standing there between shelves, browsing and minding my own business, when I see him walk past again. For some reason, at this point I start intentionally referring to him as Hipster Man Bun. I can see his mouth moving, he's muttering something under his breath. At first I think he's insane, but then I see that he has one of those hands-free Bluetooth phones over on his ear. Not that weird. I find a pair of shoes I want and keep looking around for various clothes to see if I missed anything, when I notice that this dude followed me back to the main clothes rack, still talking on his phone, still staring at me with those eyes that were a little too wide. At this point I'm fairly creeped out and decided it was time to go. I go up to the front, purchase my clothes, then go outside and start walking to the bus stop. By the time I get there it's completely dark and no one else is waiting for a bus. That isn't to say I was completely alone. The bus stop is located in a fairly populated part of town, so there were plenty of cars whizzing by. That didn't stop me from feeling unnerved though, especially not when I looked back and saw that Hipster Man Bun was walking right towards the bus stop. At this point, I keep telling myself just to calm down, and that there's nothing wrong with this guy and he's just a little creepy, sure, but none of that has to do with me. As he makes his way to the bus stop, he's then standing a few feet away from me. He's still muttering things into his phone. I strain to listen to what he's saying over the sound of traffic, and what I hear sends so many chills to my spine, it's unbelievable. Short, female, shaved pink hair. I stand there listening in absolute disbelief as he lists my features, my glasses, piercings I have, clothes, etc. I'm thoroughly terrified now. My hands are gripping the Goodwill bag so tightly that it feels that the handles are gonna rip. We stand there for a good 15 or 20 minutes before the bus arrives. Me shaking like a leaf, him continually describing me to whoever was on the other end of the call. By the time the bus pulls up, I have to resist myself from forcing the doors open. I quickly scramble into the nearly empty vehicle, and I almost expect him to come lumbering in after me. But he didn't. He stayed there, standing at the bus stop, eyes still locked on me even after the doors were shut. Through the glass, I could still see his lips moving. I knew that he was still talking about me. It was just weird. Whoever it was on the phone, he just wouldn't stop. Over the next few days I kept my guard up tenfold, always expecting to see him or whoever may have been on the other end of the call, but so far I still haven't. First of all, I am a young woman barely big enough to walk my dog. If this escalated at all, I would have no idea what I would have done, or what would have happened. I'm not easily frightened, but this scared the life out of me. It actually happened to me last night, and I have no idea if it will happen again, but I figured that it was so bizarre that people just needed to know. It was just me, my dog, who is massive and nice, and we're in my private apartment attached to some townhouses separated from the other buildings by a strip of wood. It's kind of like a tiny house that just shares a wall with an apartment building. As in, nice as it is, it's in not such a nice part of town, but I have a backyard, my own space, and work in electricity for cheap, so I love this place. It's my first time living out on my own, and I'm not gonna lie, I've been a little freaked out about living here alone. Even with a big dog for security, last night that definitely didn't help. So I was laying in my bed browsing Reddit and trying to fall asleep when I heard a tapping on my window. My bedroom has 2 windows facing the backyard on ground level, about 3 meters from the tree line, with nothing but open grass outside. At first, since I am not used to sleeping on the first floor, I thought it was a tree or something flying against the outside of the house. But that is when I remembered it. I'm on the first floor and the only floor with no trees close enough to reach the house, so I started to feel a bit nervous. I was some weird mix of both scared and annoyed about the tapping that was keeping me awake. The noise had my dog's attention and he wasn't barking yet, which meant it probably wasn't a person. So I wasn't as afraid as I could have been. Gradually, annoyance replaced the fear, and I decided I should go tell whatever it was to knock it off. Best case scenario, there was no one outside and I was talking to myself with no one to hear me. Worst case, there was someone outside and I would catch them off guard and they would leave. Right? Yeah, absolutely. I figured if there was someone there, they expected fear, not conversation. I then worked up some courage and shouted out for them to stop it in the dark, and the tapping continued. I repeated myself a little louder, then shouting at them with more profanities, asking them to stop, and the tapping stopped. After a second, I heard a male voice call back. Sorry. The tapping didn't stop again, but wow, I didn't expect for somebody actually to be there. I got out of my bed and ran to the window with my phone in hand, ready to call the police. But when I peeked through the blinds, I saw the guy with his hands up and the weirdest smile come across his face. I then quickly turned my phone away from me so that the flashlight wouldn't illuminate my face and he wouldn't know what I looked like. A few seconds later, I turned the light off and he hadn't moved 1 inch. Not even his face. He still had that weird creepy smile and was staring right at the window with his hands up, like he was posing for a photo. In hindsight, I don't know why I didn't take one. Finally, he turned around and started walking back through the woods into what I assume was his own apartment right across from mine. I had no idea what possessed him to tap on my window for half an hour or what he had in mind, but he still hasn't come back yet. I'm not sure what to do if he does. I didn't fall asleep last night and I'm nervous to go to bed tonight, but I still have class in the morning. Besides, I have a big scary dog for exactly that reason. I should be fine, but still, what kind of a person just knocks on a stranger's window at midnight? When I woke up in the morning, I went to check the window pane and saw that there were clear scratches on it. I don't know if the guy made it or not, but likely it was a weirdo living across the woods from me. I don't like to think of what he had in mind if he had have actually gotten into my bedroom. I just like to think that he was only planning to rob me. My friends and I decided to go to a little brewery in a nice part of town, sipping beers and playing some card games. Nothing crazy. I went up to the bar to order another beer and my friend walked past me and jokingly shoulder bumped me. I gave him a nudge back. Now here's where things start to get strange. I'll just call him John. He was a male in his late 30s, tall and looked very average except for his eyes which looked almost dead. and he saw what happened and approached. John said, "Why did you do that?" Me, "Oh, that? He's just my friend. We're just messing around." John, "Oh? Are you gonna do anything about it?" Me, "Obviously joking. Oh, don't you worry, I'm gonna kill him later." John, "Can you tell me it in a poem?" Me, "Now, I don't remember exactly what I said, but I actually word vomited something out after realizing he was being deadly serious." John, he said this in a very deadpan voice. "Oh, I respect that." And he extended his hands for a handshake. Now I could tell this guy was really loony, but it was like meh, so I shook his hand. Let me tell you, this guy had an iron grip, like scary strong. He held on to my hand for a little too long, so I wriggled my hamstring and decided that maybe I should just get his name, just as a precaution in case anything went down. Me, "So friend, what's your name?" And John did an inaudible, incoherent mumble. I tried again and got nothing, so I just smiled and walked back to my table. Then the hairs on the back of my neck were a little tingly, but I figured I was just paranoid. Once I got back to my table, I saw out of my peripheral vision that he was still watching me. I decided to tell my friends about this interaction, but they brushed it off as nothing, so again, they just went with the idea that it doesn't matter. A little later, there was a break in our game, so a couple of us decided to drain the main vein. My friend and I were walking past the bar to the bathroom in the back, and sure enough, John stepped directly in front of me and insisted that I shook his hand again. So like an idiot, that's exactly what I did. I tried to make small talk during this creepy handshake, but again, the dude just mumbled something. But by this point, my friend had already went to the bathroom and was just exiting. As he walked by, he heard me say something along the lines of, "Alright, you're hurting my hand now. I have to go pee, so I'm going to go." He started to walk back to the bathroom as soon as I get my hands free, so instead I just walked back to my table because I don't want to be near him. My friends were now aware of him and we were all equally creeped out. So then, 10 minutes go by. I really had to use the bathroom now, seeing as I've been holding it in. I told my friends this and one of them jokingly said, "Watch out, he might be waiting for you in there." A little light clicked on my brain and we looked around the room. He wasn't there. We were sitting by the only exit and he definitely didn't go through it because we would have seen him, so now I was freaking out. I then asked if one of my friends could go with me to the bathroom. Now, this is a random note, but there are only 2 unisex bathrooms meant for one person each. So I walked to the closer one. The light was off with the door slightly ajar. I then hesitated a little but decided to nudge it open a few feet and didn't see anything inside. Just darkness with a vague silhouette of the bathroom fixtures. Nothing felt off, it was just weird. I then turned to my friend. "Dude, I don't know, it just feels off." My friend stared, saying nothing. I don't know what he said because out of my peripheral vision, my nightmare happens. The door opens and he's standing there in the dark, in the doorway, alone, just staring at me with the creepiest smile that I've ever seen. Just to paint you a picture of how creepy this guy was, he was standing alone in the bathroom with the lights off, just waiting in there for over 10 minutes for me to walk in. According to my friends who were watching this from across the room, my reaction was just to yell out, "Oh no." I then proceeded to beeline straight back to them, shouting out no. I wish I could say that we confronted him or called the cops, but honestly, I was just too freaked out. We just grabbed our coats and got out of there. Who knows what he would have done if I had went in there alone, or if another person did. Luckily, I don't have the answer to that. All I can say is that I'm glad that I never had to be the one to find out. I would like to give a little background on my story before I begin. I was around 14 years old at this time. I'm 25 now, and I live in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania, surrounded by cornfields and woods. The house I live in was an old trailer, so it was long but not very wide. This will be important. My family owned the land behind our house, and there was around 70 acres, so the only neighbours we had across the street would usually just keep to themselves as we were so distant. With this being said, we never had to lock our front door. We had a back door, but the hinges were rusted shut, so we always had to keep it locked because no one was going to come in or out, so it didn't matter so much with the front one. Now, my mother was going through a midlife crisis, as I like to say, because she was drinking all the time and had a multitude of different guy friends whom she would bring around me and my brother, who was around 10. Also, during this crisis, she brought home a man called John. I'll just call him John for this story. He was an old guy. He was okay, but something always struck me as odd about him. But I could not place the feeling. I was young at the time and knew little about what the drugs he was doing, crimes he was committing, etc. I, however, did not know everything at the time, and I'm glad I didn't. After about a week of non-stop partying, they become an item, and not long after he moved in, which meant his 15-year-old son also came. The son, called Sam, was nothing like his father. He was very polite and respectful to me, and I remember on multiple occasions asking him how he turned out so great. His response was always the same: I don't want to be like my dad. After about 6 months, I had forgotten the odd feeling, or pushed it aside at least, and we had turned into a dysfunctional family. Now, we had our ups and downs, but knowing that I had someone there who was around my age made things seem a little less horrible. Many nights while my mother and Dan were out doing God knows what with God knows who, the three of us were left home alone, which as kids we thought was the best thing in the world. Sam and I would send my brother to bed around 9 PM and we would stay up listening to music and playing guitar until we saw the headlights, and then we would run to our rooms and pretend we'd been asleep the whole night. One night around midnight, we were sitting in the living room and Sam decided to put on his headphones, which were connected to a speaker system, so he could play his guitar without waking up my brother. He was doing this and recording a song when all of a sudden he looked over at me a little confused. I smiled and asked him why he'd stopped playing, and he put his finger to his mouth and told me to be quiet. I started to get a little worried by this and took a look around, but I didn't see anything. He took his headphones off and slowly put them down, and he walked to the front door, and he lifted the blanket just enough to see the doorknob. He instantly clicked the deadbolt to the lock position and poised for me to move to the ground. I was freaking out at this point, and I did as he wanted and laid on the floor. He slowly creeped over to me as if not to make a sound. All the while his eyes were fixed on that front door. When he made his way very slowly over to me and lay down with me, I had my buried to the corner of my arms and was silently sobbing. Every time I looked up, he would shake his head and said no, and I started crying again. We laid there like this until like 3 AM when we saw the headlights coming from the kitchen window, and I looked up and sighed and asked if we were okay now. He looked at me and said yes. I felt like I could breathe again, but there was still this knot in the bottom of my stomach because I had no clue what had just happened. He got up and unlocked the door, but he stopped when he got to the speakers. I watched as he turned off the record button. He walked me to my room and told me he would explain what happened in the morning because he did not want to get caught out of bed. I had then laid in my room and listened to my mother and Dan laughing in the kitchen and slurring their words. They had fought for a bit, and then I assumed decided to go to bed, and then there was silence. It hit me like a ton of bricks and I started to sob. At some point I had shed my last tear and fell into a nightmare. Around 6 AM, I jolted up from my bed and was completely drenched in sweat. I had no memory of my dream, but I knew it was nothing compared to what I was about to find out when I faced Sam. As soon as my feet hit the floor, I bolted to my door. I needed to know. I had to know why we had spent 3 hours in utter silence and fear. As soon as I swung the door open, I saw Sam standing by my door. His eyes were bloodshot and he looked as if he had aged 5 years. "You okay?" were the first words that come out of my mouth, and he shook his head back and forth, and I instantly remembered why he looked the way he did. I need to know why. He cut me off and spoke in a heavy voice and said, "Come with me." And he grabbed my arm and pulled me down the hallway towards the living room door and sat me in front of the speakers. He gestured to put on the headphones and I took a deep breath and did. He pushed play and all of a sudden I could hear the guitar playing in my ears. I was blankly staring in front of him, trying to figure out what I was supposed to hear. Sam turned another knob and the playing got louder, and in the middle of a chord ending I could hear a rattling sound. The sound was not something you hear all the time, but it was a sound that I could immediately place. It was the sound of the door being jiggled. My eyes widened and my heart felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. I heard my voice come through the speakers asking why he stopped playing. Then I heard another voice. It was deep and almost demonic, saying, "Let's try the front door." I heard footsteps fade away and then a click, which I knew was Sam deadbolting the front door. There were sounds of us moving around and then silence, then footsteps again. I could hear them climbing the stairs and then moving the doorknob ever so slightly. I could hear crying in the background, which is why I think I did not hear the doorknob moving. After about 10 seconds, I heard the same dark voice. "We will come back when they're home. We don't have a choice now. Let's move." I felt tears running down my face as I heard this. I ripped off the headphones and told Sam that we had to tell my mum and dad. He agreed and we ran to their bedroom and opened the door. I was screaming to wake them up, and Sam said he would walk over and tell his dad that we needed to talk to him. When they finally got out of bed, we looked at them and told them to listen to the recording. I watched as they both got a look of pure terror across their faces, and then his dad reached up and hit some button and told us not to tell anyone. I had later found out that day that Sam's dad had erased the recording. We sat down in a family meeting later that day and discussed a code word that we would use if somebody ever broke into the house. I remembered begging them to call the cops, but every time I mentioned it, they would yell at me and tell me not to say a word to anyone, so I decided to keep my mouth shut. I still don't know why we were not allowed to call the cops. The only thing I can figure is that his dad was big into drugs and didn't want the cops coming round. But when I think of it, maybe there was an even more darker or more twisted meaning to all of this. Also, every time I ask my mother about it, she instantly shuts it down. So I don't think I'll ever know why the real reason was that we could never call the cops, or if it actually was something even worse. I just don't like to think about it. I'm a 24-year-old guy, and this happened to me about 6 months ago. I live in a rather large complex, one that is very open and social. People are always outside waving to each other, having drinks and barbecues, just stuff like that. It's a safe place, with people looking out for each other all the time, and if anything happens, everybody knows. Anyway, I live in a higher part of the building, very close to the roof. In fact, there's a door near my place next to some stairs that actually leads up to it, so it isn't that hard to get up there. I've personally only ever been up there once before, and after this, I don't plan on doing it again. So it was about 8 at night. I was on my computer checking my emails as well as just relaxing and browsing different sites. Well, at that moment, my internet decides to stop working. Now, this is pretty common as I use the building's Wi-Fi and it does this at certain points. Normally, this would be okay, but I was reading three very important emails and I wasn't even able to check the other two because I hadn't even opened them yet, so that meant they didn't even load. So I decided to head outside, around to another building at a friend's house, who I know. They're really nice about letting me use their internet when these things happen. So I'm getting up to leave my place and I get out into the hallway when I hear a thump above me on the roof. At that moment, it didn't really surprise me. I didn't see anything, so I just brushed it off as a random person who fell or something like that. So I continue walking. A few minutes later, I'm nearing my friend's building as I hear a nearby bush snake. I'm getting a little weirded out at this point, but I dismiss it as just a cat or a lizard moving around in the bush and just keep walking. I arrive at my friend's place and sit down on the curb near the entrance. I then pull out my phone, unlock it and go to my emails, and continue where I left off. A few minutes into reading it, I hear another rattle, like at my building, only now it's here. It's getting increasingly loud and I'm also getting an increasingly bad feeling about this, but I tell myself that it's nothing. About 5 minutes later, I look up at the roof and get startled for a minute. There's a guy peering down at me, crouching. I figured that he's just enjoying the view of the place and just happened to be looking down for a moment. I shine the light from my phone at him. Now I can make out his features. He's wearing tattered pants, a black hoodie and a mask. One of those white ones that you buy at a party store. Only it's got a really large smiley face drew on it. Now, this creeped the hell out of me, but again, I give myself an excuse to brush it off. I just nervously laugh at this guy and go back to reading. I look up a few minutes later and this guy is just sticking his head over even more than before. I'm starting to get even more scared now. This is beginning to feel like a horror story. It was just me and this guy out there, and I really didn't know what he wanted, so I decided to get up and I walked back to my place. I get back with no trouble and start to laugh by the time I get there, thinking about how silly I was. This guy was probably just some prankster trying to scare me or something. So now I'm in a good mood, walk into the entrance, and I look up and I immediately feel all my good mood drain away. The same guy is there, only now he's on my roof, in the same creepy manner, staring down at me. I figured he must have run over when I left or gotten on top of the roof before I got there. So now I'm just standing there, frozen for a moment, and this guy tilts his head as if he's wondering what's wrong. I quickly head inside and just try and forget about it, going to my place and locking the door. My internet is working now anyway. So later on that night, I decided to try and go to sleep and forget about all of this. I lay in my bed for a while, then finally I start to get sleepy and shut my eyes. A little while later I hear tapping on my window near my balcony, so I get up to investigate the noise. I go to the balcony's glass door, pull it back and the curtains, and I immediately scream. This guy, who I called the roof man for obvious reasons, is hanging from the roof, staring at me upside down. He tilts his head and I'm standing there frozen, wondering what the hell he wants from me or where he come from. What he does next scares me even more. He then decides to climb down, get onto my balcony, knocks on my glass door like he wants me to let him in, which I don't comply. He starts banging lightly, then this escalates until he rams into the glass at full force, cracking it. By this time, I'm scrambling up and unlocking my door to get out of there. I open the door and go out quickly as I hear the glass shatter. I shut the door and run down the hallway like I've never ran before, banging on my neighbour's door. I hear my neighbour come up to answer and I look back at my place down the hall and see my door open and the roof man peeks out. At this moment, my neighbour answers and looks at me, worried. I point down the hall and he looks at the man. The roof man is just standing there, staring at us. Suddenly, he breaks into a sprint, running at us crazy fast. My neighbour pulls me inside to his place quickly, closes the door. A couple of seconds after, we feel loud banging at the door, much louder than my banging earlier. We look out the peephole to see, and he's relentlessly ramming at the door. The door holds up though. After a while, he gets up and just runs off. We called the police and they searched the complex for him, but he wasn't there. I don't know what scares me more, that horrific night or knowing that he's still out there. So this happened in early July, and it still creeps me out a bit today. I'm a soldier and I live in the barracks on base. I'm not married and can't afford my own place. For security reasons, I will not name the base or its location. It's pretty quiet still around here aside from the common parties that happen during the weekends. So this event was surprising to me. Additionally, I work the night shift 4 days a week from 2 to midnight, so it is even quieter on most days when I return to my room. This night, however, was on the 4th of July weekend. Now, the military gets a 4-day weekend on federal holidays, so the common area was a bit louder on Thursday night, my last workday for the week. To give you a better idea of the layout, the barracks is separated into 4 3-story buildings that share a large concrete common area. Since we obviously aren't allowed to smoke in our rooms, the common area has 2 designated smoking areas on either side. These are what we call the pits. The pits each consist of a picnic table, a grill, and a large trash bin covered by a block that covers out the rain. The pits are the site of most of the parties that occur during the weekends. Well, mainly the ones furthest from my building, when I get out of work early. So, it was about 10 when I got to the barracks and made my way to my own room. As per usual on nights that don't have work days following them, there was a party at the pit furthest from my building. Most of the guys were outside that there. However, there was one person at my building's pit. Originally, I assumed he was just out there to smoke and wasn't up for partying. What was strange, however, was that he hadn't lit a cigarette or a vape. He wasn't even on his phone. He just sat there, dressed in blue jeans and a red hoodie with his hood up. It was the middle of July, and we're in the south, so this was a bit strange. But then again, the thing is, the barracks are pretty cold, so I'd assumed that he just stepped out to the warm. He sat up on the table with his arms in his front pockets and his head hanging, wanting to smoke. I stood at the opposite side of the table and lit a cigarette. The guy didn't speak or move the entire time. He just sat there, just staring into his lap blankly. I didn't think much of it and just made my way to my room, changed, and just went on the internet for a while. It's important to note a few things here. Each room house consists of 2 soldiers, and the doors automatically lock when they're closed. The only people with the keys are the unit headquarters and the room's residents themselves. So this meant that in the event of somebody trying to get in, or if anybody had lost their keys, they would have to call to get someone to unlock it every time they needed to get back into their room until the key is replaced. Additionally, my room is located on the 2nd floor of the building and is a bit tucked away around the back, unlike the rest of the building, so there is next to no traffic outside my room. I got used to it really, but lastly, on my side of the room, there's only one window where the door is, so I can rarely see who passes from my room because how the window's situated. Finally, my roommate worked an odd shift from 8 PM to 4 AM, and I wasn't too sure what days he worked. Also, the room is very dark, so I cannot see if my roommate is asleep in the room when I first enter, so I close the door quietly by keeping the knob turned as it closes, and at this time he definitely wasn't back. It's around 2 AM. I had decided that I would hunker down to get some sleep, but before I dozed off, I could hear some shuffling from outside. I decided to peek out the window and could see some obviously drunk girl tripping over herself trying to get to her room. I knew the girl lived in the room next to mine, so I didn't see a need to go and help her since she was literally right there, but I decided that I was going to listen for a while until she had entered her room. About 10 minutes later, I heard someone walking towards my door and stop, so I figured that this was just my roommate getting home, but I couldn't hear the obvious sound of someone unlocking the door, and for a long moment it was silent. Then, the sound of my door slowly opening. Instantly I sat up and looked at the foot of my bed where the door was. There was no sound of the doorknob opening, and no click of the lock. The door was very slowly being pushed open as if someone was trying to keep it silent the whole time, which isn't normal for my roommate. After the door was fully opened, someone, not in uniform, just walked in. At first, I didn't recognise who it was, but then I noticed a red hoodie. I jumped up and screamed for them to get out. The man then just jumped and darted out of the room. I jumped out of bed and ran to the door, but by the time I made it, the guy jumped over the rail onto the bushes below and was running across the commons area. Immediately, I called the MPs and they arrived within minutes. A few of them did a search of the area while the rest made trips around the rooms to check that everyone was okay. The girl's room was next to mine and was also not closed. After some searching though, however, they eventually found the guy in the storage room of another room at the barracks building. A few weeks passed until I found out the whole story. Apparently, the guy wasn't even a soldier, but was an ex of the girl who lived next to me. Prior to that night, the ex didn't know what room she lived in, and he had attempted to follow her to her room for some time after she had finished partying. He knew she didn't have a roommate at the time, so he figured that he'd be able to prey on her without anyone noticing. I don't know how the guy got onto the base, but fortunately for the girl, and in my attempt to be quiet, I had accidentally not closed my door completely, so the guy mistook my room for hers. What's worse is that the girl had not closed her door whatsoever either, so the guy would have easily been able to just break into hers while she is extremely drunk and likely unconscious. While I'm fortunate that the girl was safe, I fear for what might have happened had I been asleep when that creep was in my room. This happened to me a few years ago, not far from my house, and this still gives me chills every time I walk down the sidewalk alone. Summer was at an end and my school was having a planned day, so I stayed home with my older sister. She had a terrible cold with high fever and a really bad cough. Sometimes it worried me, so I called my mum in her lunch break to ask her what she could do about it, but she wouldn't be off work until 8 in the evening. She said that she had a meeting right after 2. She told me to go to the drugstore and buy some cough medicine and something for the fever. Even though I'm very lazy, I obliged. I just wanted to see my sister feeling better. I live in the north side of Norway, so it didn't take long before it got dark outside. It also rained cats and dogs here, and it had been like that for many days, so it was pretty cold. I thought to myself that I wouldn't be surprised if I caught the same cold as well, especially from the weather, but I just had to suck it up, put on my raincoat and head out. The drugstore isn't that far away from where I live, it's maybe 10 minutes by foot. I would always walk slowly then, but not now. I got to the drugstore and bought the stuff I needed without any problems, and the woman cashier was a bit chatty. I'm not a chatty person and I hate small talk, so it was kind of awkward. I eventually got out of there and began to walk home. I was about halfway there when I noticed a car coming up behind me, very slowly. I could hear the sharp sound of the brakes as it slowed down until it was just rolling next to me. It was already very cold out, but this made me freezing. The car was dark greyish with dimmed out windows. It looked very expensive though, enough to make my car look dull, but I was too scared to care. It then continued like this until eventually one of the windows rolled down beside me, and I turned to see a guy in his 20s flashing me a smile. I could barely see the driver and the two other guys in the back. It was all guys, but it made me want to puke, so I looked away. "Hey sweetie, where are you heading? Need a lift?" His voice made me want to cry. His tone was so sweet, yet taunting. You can only describe it as haunting. He wanted to hurt me, I just knew it. "What's in your bag?" he asked me. I could see his hand in my peripheral vision reaching out to the car and pointing at my bag. That's when I saw it. There was something shiny and very sharp in the driver's hand. I didn't even think, I just ran. There was a neighbourhood in the opposite side of the road, so I ran past the front of the car, over the road and into someone's back garden. It was a miracle that I didn't get hit, and that they were too shocked to speed up, but they soon snapped out of it. I could hear loud swearing in the background and the car stopped, and it slammed all the doors shut. I tucked my bag under my coat so it wouldn't make such a loud sound as I kept running. I didn't think of knocking at any houses because I knew they would get to me before anybody could open it. I ran zigzags between the houses trying to lose them out of sight and looking for somewhere to hide. And I found somewhere. It worked. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were still after me. I then spotted a huge bushy area at a ditch that was pretty steep. I hesitated for a second, but I just went for it. Slid down there like I was a pro, crawled inside the biggest, thickest bush I could find and waited. It didn't take long for them to show up, however. I could see their shoes as they paced around me. "You let her go," they said, as they stood right beside where I was hiding. I had to bite down on my coat to stop myself from screaming. How could you know that she was crazy enough to run like that? I recognized the voice. It was a voice that was talking to me in the car. "She's so fast for being that fat. Shut up, search over there." They then looked everywhere. They even searched through the bushes right next to me. I could barely breathe and my heart was beating so hard and fast, so I was afraid that they would literally hear it. But they then finally gave up on searching for me after what felt like an eternity. And I heard them cuss and yell out one more time before they left. I waited there, listening for probably an hour before getting out of my hiding spot and knocking on the first house I could. The couple living there was so kind that they let me stay there and wait for my mum to pick me up after I called her and explained everything. When we got home, my sister was waiting for us, angry that I took so long, and I just had to laugh. I never saw that car again, and I never called the police. Since this was Norway, this area's quiet. They couldn't do anything else than write a report in a file, then just right away. They needed proof and a name, and I couldn't remember anything. And that was the last that ever come of it. I recently drove from Philadelphia to Buffalo, New York with my cat. The ride was long, but we were making decent time for the most part. She and I had gotten up toward right before you get into New York. It was around 5:30 p.m, but that also meant that it was pitch black outside too. We had only stopped once at McDonald's and I drank their iced tea quickly to try and stay awake. I definitely had to pee. I didn't want to leave my cat in the car, so I put her on a leash and we walked into the gas station and I said, "Do you mind if I use the restroom in here?" The man behind the counter said sure, and she and I entered into the bathroom. She sat on the counter while I did my thing. The store definitely wasn't empty, as there were some other dudes in there browsing around for cheaper cigarettes and stuff. There was a woman talking to the counter guy up front. She was probably a regular though, based on the familiarity they had when they saw each other. My cat jumped about a foot down when we heard the doorknob rattle. I laughed and said, "Sorry, it's occupied right now." My cat is a trained animal, I should mention. She is trained to handle people, stimulating situations, crowds, and relatively loud noises. So she's used to all of them things, but she still hates cars. I looked over at her after she jumped, and her tail was full as it could possibly be, and she was getting low and slipped up into her favourite position on my shoulders. She dug into my hair with her nails and did a little grumble at me, saying that she wants to be let outside. The doorknob then rattled once again, and she reached out towards the door like she was about to strike out. "It's still occupied," I called out, but I wasn't laughing this time. We then heard someone speak. It was a man's voice, and honestly it kinda made my blood run cold. They were speaking a cousin of my native language, and my native language isn't English. They were saying, "Should I grab her when she comes out?" And in my native tongue, grab doesn't really have the multiple connections like it does in England. It could mean like, let me grab them before they go, or let me grab something before I go out, like food or etc. So they used what was similar like that. As far as I could tell though, they were asking to grab me the second I walked out. "No, the cashier is right here. We can go stand outside. I think her car is a blue one." My cat did her angry grumble bug sound, and I tried to pet her to reassure her. There weren't any windows in this bathroom, and my car was parked unwisely around the side of a parking lot. I parked it a little away from the lights because I had a lot of stuff in it and didn't want to make them visible. We heard their footsteps retreat, and we sat there for what felt like a long time. We both jumped when we heard a knock on the door. "Come out, quickly, and my girlfriend will lead you through the back to your car. They are standing out by the pumps." It was a counter guy who I thought was the regular. I opened the door and she ushered me to the back. She opened the door and I could see my car about 20 feet away. I wanted to sprint, but I remembered I used my key thing to set the alarm. I unlocked the car with my keys and set the alarm off. I threw myself into the driver's seat, unlocked it with the key thing and quickly pressed the button to lock it again. I then felt my heart in my throat as I threw the car into reverse and got the hell out of there. On my way out, I noticed that the guys standing near the blue car on the other side of the parking lot were clearly there for a reason. I don't think they realised that I had a different car to the one they had went to, but it still scares me to this day thinking of what would have happened hadn't I have realised what they were actually saying. I could have easily just thought they were talking about anything had I have not known. So, I would like to preface this story a little. From 2014 to 2016, I served in Guatemala as a missionary for the Mormon Church. Now, there are lots of opinions about the Mormons, and everybody is entitled to their own view, but this is not a forum for religious debate or politics, so I will not try and convert you. However, I do wish to share this encounter with you. Now, as we are missionaries, we talk to everyone. I'm sure that everybody knows this, but no matter who you are, what hour of the day, or what we are planning, no one ever comes up to talk to us. Or if they do, it's such a rarity that it almost seems like it shouldn't have happened. I was serving in an area of Guatemala City known for being rough around the edges, and the middle, and everywhere between. I'd been there for about 4.5 months when I received a new companion from Mexico named Mendez. Our day together went alright. We talked to lots of people, walked all the way around the city, and around 7 o'clock we stopped at Tinder, which is a small store, to buy some water. The instant we stopped at this store, we were approached by a man that was completely hammered. He wanted to talk to us and also talk for money. Now, We're not allowed to give money to drunks, so I bought him some bread and he gave us his address and we agreed to meet him the next day. It was a long shot, but we decided to meet with him the next day. He was waiting for us at his house. It was this tiny house made out of corrugated tin and filled with filthy, vicious dogs. The worst bit of it all was definitely the smell. He was happy to see us, however, sober, so we talked for a bit. His main concern was dropping alcohol, and he wondered if we'd be able to help him. We helped him set some goals and agreed to come the next day. It was a great meeting. He also gave us a big smile as we were about to leave, and we left. The next 6 weeks were very normal. We were able to teach him our message and also help him with his drinking. Every meeting he was smiling and happy to see us, a little too happy now if I think about it. Every time he was just a little bit more excited to let us in, and a little bit less willing to let us leave. I kind of began to get a bit nervous around him. Something didn't feel right. I couldn't put a finger on it, but hey, he wanted us to visit, so we did. All that changed one Saturday night, however. We were hosting an activity at our local chapel and invited him along. While we were talking about some things and walking there, we see him in the street. He called out to remind him of us. He looked at us, smiled and walked away. We didn't see him at the activity though. We didn't see him the next morning at the church either, which was weird because he had gone every Sunday since we had started visiting him. Then, during lunch, I received a phone call from a payphone. It was him, obviously drunk, and crying, and said that he needed us at his house. I told him that we'd be right over, and we were there within 10 minutes. When he opened the door, we walked in and sat down. I could faintly smell the alcohol in his breath. He then just looked at us, sat down on his bed. He didn't have a shirt on. It was a little ball on the bed. I noticed a familiar shape though under the shirt. It was a gun, with the barrel peeking out. Now I've been in Guatemala for a few years now, so I didn't lose my head, but in every sense I was now on high alert. As I looked at my companion, who had also noticed the gun as well, he calmly asked the man what had happened. He began telling us about how the night before, instead of going to the activity, he found a man that, quote, didn't like him, and he killed him. He explained in detail so much that I could see it all happening in my mind. He stood up from bed and went to my companion, using his fingers to act out how he had put 3 bullets into the guy's head. He explained to us about how he had killed people since he was a boy, growing up in one of the local bad areas. He explained about how he had to kill women, children and elderly, and about how he couldn't stop doing it. By this time my mind was swirling. All that kept happening was I was playing out through my head how that he was going to grab a gun and draw on us. He began to sob, but a minute after, he looked at us through tearful eyes and said, "You're the only 2 good friends that I ever had. I wanted to show you something out behind my house." That was the last straw. I couldn't hear anymore. We had to go. I looked at my companion and suggested to the man that we say a prayer and meet tomorrow. He agreed instantly and kneeled down on the floor, using the bed next to him to prop his elbows. I positioned myself next to him, directly in front of the gun. I had gently but firmly put my hands around his clasped hands as my companion said a short prayer. We slowly backed ourselves to the door and said goodbye to the man. He looked at us, and we ran out the back door, and we shut it. I could hear him crying again. We ran up the street to a Mormon family house and basically ran inside, panting heavily. They asked us what was wrong, and we explained everything. They helped us get to our apartment, and we called our leader to report the situation. The ending is rather anticlimactic, but I left the area about a few days later. Mendez stayed and avoided the area for the rest of the time he was in the city. Now, lots of people might be thinking, why didn't you call the police? Well, this is Guatemala. They wouldn't have really helped. All we could do is avoid him and hope that we never met him again. When I was younger, I grew up in a house that was literally in the middle of nowhere. The only thing that we had surrounded us was trees. That not only made me very lonely but very bored. And the biggest problem was my parents were out most of the time, so I got left with a lot of chores to do. The problem was, this was back in the time when we didn't really have phones or internet, so it made communication and seeing people really hard. The only friends that I had really were the dogs that lived about half a mile away from where our house was. They were very nice dogs, but there was about 3 of them and we just couldn't keep them in the house because even though they were nice, you couldn't trust them. They were sort of like guard dogs, if you will, although sometimes my mum takes them into the house so that she can bath them. This story took place on one of those days where that I was very lonely. I'd gotten back from school early and I wanted to go and see some of my friends, but the problem was I lived so far away from everyone that I couldn't even do that, or if I did, it would take at least a 2-mile walk to even get to a bus stop. I was kind of annoyed because I really felt like I wasn't living, and it was kind of just getting me down really. So all I had to do for the day was the chores, and to be honest, it was mind-numbingly boring. Not only that, I didn't even have any siblings. After I'd completed the chores though, all I could do really was just watch out the window or read. I did some reading and kind of took my mind off things for a little while, and I really liked doing this because I found it as some kind of escape away from it all. There was, however, one thing that was very unsettling. It wasn't a problem that I'd mentioned earlier because it was something that I never really took notice of until bringing it back in this story, but we did have a problem where that we lived isolated. Yeah, we did have guns and stuff, but we had some really creepy stuff happen at night. For example, once, a lot of the dogs had got killed. This didn't happen to me directly, but my father, he had it where that his previous dogs he owned got killed and he had no idea why. What's the most scary thing that I've ever heard was that my mum said that when she woke up to leave for work in the morning, there were footprints in the snow leading up to her house, and she followed them back and they went about 200 meters and they literally just stopped. Almost as if who or whatever had made it had just vanished. Now, the other problem was that though I did learn about these later, a lot of the real scary things my parents never told me about because they knew how much it would worry me. And if I think of it now, had I have known all them stories and what I'm about to share with you now, there's no way I would have lived there anyway. It kind of gave me chills just being away from everyone else, but this is one of the scarier things that happened to me, but I wasn't sure at the time if it was my mind playing tricks on me. As I couldn't sleep one night, I laid there just looking out the window, and I was half asleep at that moment and I saw what looked like handprints on the window. Now, I was on the 2nd story of our house, but the way our house was designed, it was quite a bit taller than a normal house. I was looking at it just interested, then after about 10 minutes I kind of come round and realised that really shouldn't be there. I walked up to it and went to rub it off, nice and calm, thinking it was me earlier, but it didn't go anywhere. I tried again, and I took a step back and I realised that these were from the outside. I instantly screamed to my parents and they come rushing into my room, and I told them that I was sure somebody had tried to break in. I went outside with my dad and the gun to try and find out whoever it was, but what we found then might have been even more scary than if we had actually found someone. As we looked down, we could see that there were literally no prints whatsoever outside. There was nothing in the snow where a ladder had been or anything at all for that matter. No footsteps, nothing. I don't like to think of it now because it scares me so much, but how could somebody have possibly got their handprints all the way up there without even leaving a trace? So, anyway, that was one of the most scary things that happened to me, but it doesn't compare to this. It was during the day that I was alone. So, back to my original story. After I'd done reading, I was just looking outside the window and I heard some of the dogs howling. I thought this was weird because they didn't normally do this, and I was almost sure that my mum said she had to take them somewhere. Regardless, I picked up my gun. Now, I know that sounds stupid, but you have to do this sometimes because we do get it where other animals can try and hunt or at least go towards the dogs, so it's always important you're at least armed and ready for action in case you do. I sighed and closed the door and started down. Now, the minute I started walking towards where the dogs were, I got this really weird feeling. It was almost like it was too quiet and too silent outside. The thing that was strange was that the dogs immediately stopped the second I opened the door. Now, I know for a fact that if they're in trouble or want help, they wouldn't stop doing this. They would just go on to bark continually. So that unsettled me a little bit, but as I was walking further down, all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I just got this really weird cold feeling. If you've not experienced anything like this before, it might be hard to understand, but I just couldn't shake this feeling off. I went a little bit further and I realised that I started shaking. I just thought it was paranoia, but something seemed off. I then stood there for even longer and just waited. I was still expecting to hear the dogs again, but all I was met with was silence. Now, that was really strange. The dogs would have at least made sounds back to me. I continued on though with my gun in hand, and I finally got to where the dogs were. As I got to where they should have been, I couldn't hear anything. I opened the door where they went and I saw a piece of paper and note. I was very worried that somebody had left it for me and it wasn't my family members, but it was my mum. She had just reminded me that not to worry if I couldn't find the dogs because my mum had taken them out and told me just to go back inside. Now, normally I would be relieved at this, but I just had to stop for a moment and it kind of all sunk in. There was no animals that should have made a sound anything like that, and how comes that my mum still hadn't returned with the dogs? As I realised this, I locked myself inside and just sat there waiting. And I was pleased to be met with more silence. Well, at least I was at first. I then heard it again, even louder. Only this time it didn't sound like an animal was making it. I began to sweat as I was holding my gun, and I heard it again. I wasn't sure whether to just shout out at whatever it was to shut up or get shot, but I just couldn't. I was almost petrified in a primitive way that I just couldn't move. I decided the best thing to do would be just to wait there. As I was waiting, I kept on hearing that sound. It was so scary it almost made me want to pass out. I heard it again, once again even louder. Just as I was looking out the window trying not to be seen, I saw something move out of my peripheral vision. It was somebody walking past in all black with some kind of face mask on, holding some type of recorder. As I listened even closely again, I could hear that it was the sounds of somebody screaming, and every so often you would hear them call out for help. I couldn't make out much more of them, but they seemed to be approaching towards a house. At this moment, I really wasn't sure what to do. I thought that I was going to die. Who in the hell is this? What do they want from me? I thought. I then realised that maybe they're going to the house to go and get my mum. I very quietly then opened the door and stepped outside, and began slowly making my way, watching my every step. I got to a point where that I couldn't see anyone, so I decided to start jogging quickly, as the sound had stopped. I then thought, oh, this could be it. I'm not going to let my mum die, and I sprinted back in, screaming out for my mum. And then I heard the dogs all barking frantically. My mum was there at the door waiting for me, asking for where I'd went. She could see how scared I looked and quickly ushered me in and closed the door. The dogs were still going mental. I took at least 5 minutes to explain what had happened from being in shock, but as I told my mum, she immediately called the police, and my dad come home almost instantly, back from work. To be honest, he looked even more scared than I did, and as I was talking to my dad explaining everything, I heard it again, this time only more faintly, but I knew it was the exact same sound. My dad almost looked angry now, and he stepped out with the dogs and his gun, and my mum begging him to stay inside, but he was having none of it. I ran up to my room to see if I could see anything, but there was nothing. I was just praying that my dad didn't get hurt in all of this. The dogs were continually going mental. I was waiting for as long as I could until eventually I just couldn't wait any longer, and I ran outside with my gun also. I was then met by my dad, and he had this same blank expression again. The dogs were still going crazy, but he told me that he didn't find anything. We then waited inside, and eventually the police showed up. And the police launched an investigation, but that was the last that we ever heard of it. It was only when looking back and piecing it all together that I realised that this must have all been connected somehow. God knows what would have happened if he had actually found me in there. Hello everyone, I wanted to say a massive thank you for watching the video. And I wanted to say a massive thank you to everyone for all the support on my last video. I really appreciated it, so I just wanted to say another massive thank you, because it was so nice for me to see that many people actually helped and cared about me. It's really touching. So yeah, thank you everyone for that. And I will do a lot more narration videos like this, and sorry I've not been able to have anybody else on here. It's just some of the things that I was doing kind of gone a lot slower than I thought, so I had to jump in on this video to get it done without another person. But I will be working on them soon, so thank you all. You should enjoy my next videos coming up, and have a nice day.